Hello everyone, this is our fourth test discussion for your Anubhav test series that we had. We had 4 papers. So before I start with discussing each passage, just a few words about how to tackle a paper like this. One is that we have left the questions for all the 4 Anubhav papers between 25 to 30 passages. In fact, we have not crossed the 27 mark. This paper has 27 questions. What most of you would have noticed when you went through the paper, however, the main thing you would have noticed is the length of the passages. Right? Passages are longer. Now, there is some reasoning behind this. If you notice, like let's say if this is the page on which UPSC gives us the question. Nowadays there are times when they'll give us passages of this length at least. Sometimes they have even exceeded this length, and this is just for one question, right? So one of the subtle ways that they can increase the difficulty, slightly increase the difficulty, is by increasing the amount of material we have to read. And this is, I'm just talking about the length of the passage. The difficulty of the question, if you see, each question, actually the questions are quite easy. I'll show you why they're easy and we'll go through that. But the length of the passages is slightly longer. We can expect some kind of a change like this. I've noticed that the amount of reading that we are supposed to do, UPSC has increased it by about 15% in the past 2 or 3 years. I expect that if they want to increase the level of difficulty, that's the way they would go. They would not probably change the question stems. So which is why you'll see slightly longer passages in the paper today. Now, the other thing that I want to mention briefly is we go through a very stepwise process of solving these passages. By very stepwise, I mean it has to be methodical, and that way we can ensure more accuracy. I'll quickly go through the method when I solve the first question. But what I want to point out about the method categorically in this paper is, you'll notice that options will have problematic words and phrases. Sometimes all the options have problematic words and phrases. And when we say problematic happens in 2 ways. Like the nature of a problematic word or phrase can play out in 2 ways. One way would be that we get something that is not in the passage. So let's say beyond passage. And the other way in which the option would have something problematic with it would be, and this is important, a quantifying word or phrase. Quantifying meaning it measures something, it will talk about degrees of something, such as you'll find words such as fully, no, only, some, most, etc. These words especially are going to be really handy for you to check which option is acceptable or not. If you have a word like this, obviously mark that word and then check whether it's acceptable or not. But these measuring, quantifying words or phrases are something that will help you be really accurate even in a paper like this, which is, the passages are slightly longer. Let's try and see how this works out. This is our first passage, and the first passage, so the stepwise process or the methodical process of solving is that I break the passage down to what is the main idea of the passage. Now, this is not required for all questions, but most students for most questions should do this. Your accuracy would be higher. So let's say we are talking about the challenges about earthquakes. This is the topic of the author. We'll call topic as blank A. Okay, earthquakes pose compound challenges. Challenges are listed for us, immediate loss of life, property, etc., governance. despite technological advances like seismic zoning and early warning systems, this remains weak. In developing nations, urbanization often outpaces regulatory mechanisms. Moreover, phenomena such as glacial melting, etc. So if you notice, compound challenges are described for us so far, and how those challenges are even more compounded is mentioned for us, right? Interdisciplinary monitoring prediction models is increasingly seen as the way forward. So now the author is offering us some kind of solution. Yet the challenge remains ensuring timely coordination. Earthquakes thus demand more than scientific solutions. They require political will, community participation, and institutional reform. These other two blanks that I've marked, we'll call this as, this was blank A, this was the topic of the author. Blank B is what the author says specifically about the topic. And if the author has made a recommendation like this or a suggestion like this, that has to be in the in blank B. This is step 1 of our solving process. I need to create absolute clarity about the passage. Description of this takes longer than actually you guys doing this in the exam. This will be quite fast if you practice this. Once I have clarity about the passage, I can actually evaluate the options in a much more careful and a quick way. So we'll see how this works out. Okay. So with reference to the above passage, following statements correctly identify the main challenges in managing earthquake disasters. I also carefully see what the question is asking me. This is step 2. Correctly identify the main challenges in managing earthquake disasters, right? Let's look at 1. Enforcement of seismic safety regulations is inadequate, particularly in vulnerable developing regions. You'll notice that you'll find option 1 in the middle part of the passage here. Enforcement remains weak. Now, the reason why I said I know it's somewhere in the middle portion of the passage, because I've created this frame of reference and all our minds naturally maintain the location of information. So I can quickly review things like this and not solve them based on memory. Remember, this is not a memory test, never solve based on memory. Alright, so statement 1 is valid. This is stated in the passage, right? So this invalidates these two choices. Now I simply need to check 4. Okay, make sure you're using these keys whenever they're there, and that's to your advantage. Infrastructure damage alone is the most difficult aspect. This is invalid. This is not stated. And if you notice, these words are quantifying words. So I can go back to the passage and check. This is invalid. If you check, it's invalid. So C is invalid. The right answer would be option A. Indirect climatic factors. So this is the start of the second paragraph. Indirect climatic factors may influence. So both these options are correct. A is the correct choice for question number 1. We are solving set C, by the way. This is set C. Alright. So A is the right answer for the first question. Now I'm not going to break down each passage for you in this way. It takes unnecessary amount of time. But remember the stepwise process. You have to mark the words which will indicate blank A and blank B of the author. Blank A is the topic of the author. Blank B is what the author says about the topic. This will give you a frame of reference or the main point of the author. After you're done with this process, then you go to the question. And here the question is, which of the following assumptions can be considered correct? Now remember, in classes I've discussed this multiple times. An assumption is something that is underlying the passage. If I say, go to the market and buy vegetables to you. Suppose I say this to you, go to the market and buy vegetables. So the underlying assumption of this is that you know the way to the market. You know the way to market to the market. Now the reason why I know for sure this is a definite underlying assumption, because this uses the word the market. When I said go to the market and buy vegetables, I used the word the market. This means that you know the way to the market is an underlying assumption. If I remove this assumption, if I eliminate this assumption, then the passage will stop making sense. We have discussed this in class multiple times, but this is the definition of assumptions. We are looking for valid assumptions from the passage. Alright, so one says India believes that strategic assertiveness and economic engagement with China can coexist. So we are told we are trying to be strategically assertive and we also have economic engagement with China. So it's underlying that India believes both can take place. X and Y can both take place at the same time. This is an underlying assumption. If I said cannot coexist, then the passage would stop making sense. So I know for sure one is a valid assumption. We tried the not test. One is valid. One is valid, that eliminates this. Now I need to check 2 and 3 only. I don't need to worry about 4 at all. 2 says China views India's infrastructure development and Quad participation as direct provocations. Direct provocation, this is invalid. If you notice, direct provocations is a quantifying phrase. And here, it's quantifying the degree of provocation. And it's invalid, by the way. Nothing like this is stated in the passage. This is invalid. So 2 is invalid. Now I simply need to check 3. Economic cooperation is seen by both nations as sufficient. Another quantifying phrase, which is quantifying degree of sufficiency of economic participation. So economic cooperation is sufficient to solve their geopolitical tensions. So invalid. The right answer is D, 1 only. Alright, let's try the next one. Okay, now what does the passage imply about focusing solely on external development like technology and infrastructure? This passage was about, we often equate progress with visible infrastructure, but it's not what external, it's internal, what will, internal in thought, etc., what will change our future, change, etc., right? It's not just visible, like buildings won't affect, but what happens in our minds will affect more. So what does the passage imply about focusing solely on external development, right? What would go wrong with this? Okay, so let's start with option D. It eliminates the need for moral education. This is extreme. This is a quantifying word or phrase, and this is opposite of what is stated in the passage. So D is invalid. C says it's the only way, again a quantifying word or phrase, to solve modern global challenges. Invalid. Actually, you need internal transformation, not external. B says it guarantees material success. Guarantees, again, extreme material success. So notice actually options are really easy. Those of you who are relying on passages, I expect you to score somewhere like 23 at least on 27 in this paper. It's that easy according to me, or maybe even more. Okay, A says it may create a society that appears advanced but lacks depth and meaning. You don't have complete transformation if you don't have complete transformation if you simply rely on external development. What you need is internal transformation. So it may create a society that appears advanced but lacks depth and meaning. A is the correct answer for question number 3. Alright, let's see the next one. Okay, so this would be question 4. What is the central theme? Central theme is main point, and I told you we can measure it using words of the author by splitting the passage into blank A and B. Okay. So, throughout human history, people have been excluded from governance, and we are given reasons for why this was the case. And certain hierarchical groups excluded most people from governance. Over time, democratic ideals challenged this exclusion. So, topic of discussion was throughout human history, people were excluded, right? This is blank A, and blank B is democratic challenges have democratic ideals have challenged this exclusion. Now notice that just putting these two blank together is going to bring us to the right answer. Okay, let's start with D. D says the masses have traditionally preferred hierarchical rule. Masses have traditionally preferred hierarchical rule. Invalid. And notice this is actually factually invalid. Notice the main point about option D is it doesn't mention this at all. Central theme is not mentioned at all. D is invalid. C says democracy has nearly raised the influence of elitist rule and thought from modern governance. I see some students going with option C, but this would be invalid. This is not, they have challenged is not the same as nearly raised. Challenged is not the same as nearly raised. So, invalid. B says monarchs and philosophers have developed complex systems that always ensured fair governance. This is opposite of what is stated in the passage. So, these are all invalid. The right answer would be option A. And like we saw, option A is going to be societies have historically favored elitist governance, right? But democratic ideals gradually promoted inclusion. So this was the positive change that slowly came over. Earlier society was hierarchical and people were excluded. Eventually democracy promoted this. Alright. So this would be question 11 in set C, and here we are expected to check which of the following assumptions forms the foundation of the author's argument. Okay. Now, author's argument in this case, notice what is slightly tricky about this is you do need to notice the author's argument carefully. Okay. Author's argument is nothing but the main point of the author, just a different way to phrase it. Many in India argue that reducing defense expenditure will naturally foster peace. Okay. But this is, according to the author, not correct. This is a naive view, right? So the author's argument is we should not reduce defense expenditure. The author gives this in more detail in the second paragraph, believing that reducing defense budgets alone will disarm adversaries, will disarm tensions is flawed. So let's say this is blank B. But this is also what the author's argument is about. Now we need to find what logic is underlying this. So this is basically like asking what is the underlying assumption behind this. Okay. So let's look at question 11. All wars are caused by lack of communication between countries. All wars, extreme, quantifying word or phrase, lack of communication not discussed by the author as a cause of war. So A is invalid, and most important, it is not underlying the author's argument. So A is invalid. B says India's allies are unlikely to engage in peaceful behavior even if India disarms. So firstly, India's allies. This is not what the passage is about, right? So invalid. C says a strong military capability acts as a deterrent against potential threats. So the author said don't disarm. Or another way to mention this would be disarming is not equal to peace, right? So option C looks like a possible closed choice. Let's look at option D. Most citizens oppose defense expenditures. these options A, B and D are not underlying the author's argument. The author's argument is based on, which is author's argument is don't disarm or disarming is not equal to peace. This is based on option C. A strong military capability acts as deterrent against potential threats. All right. Let's see the next one. This would be question 12 and it's an inference question. The definition for inference that I had given in class also and multiple times in our previous discussion is us putting two facts together and coming up with a new fact, right? Two facts would be, let's say, dark clouds in the sky and water in street. We put these two facts together and infer that it has rained. We can't say it will rain, but it has rained. And this is based on both these facts. To reach this new conclusion, we needed both the facts in this case, right? Sometimes you can make an inference based on one fact or more facts. Here you needed two facts. This is what an inference is. Okay, so let's go through the question. I'm sure everyone has been through the passage. Let's look at statement 1. Environmental harm of transporting food over long distances outweighs the benefits of year-round availability. This idea of outweighing the benefits is, firstly, it's a quantifying phrase and it's an invalid idea, right? Let's look at 2. Techniques used to preserve and process food for long distance transport significantly enhance its shelf life and nutritional content. This is actually opposite, right? Significantly enhances actually opposite of what is stated in the passage. So 1 is invalid. Actually, if 1 is invalid, we would have invalidated these two, and if 2 is invalid, we would have invalidated this. So we don't actually need to, if by the way all of you are clear about marking such quantifying words and checking them against the passage, you would save a lot of time. You wouldn't have to go through options 3 and 4. 3 and 4 are valid inferences. Exporting agricultural goods may intensify malnutrition. This is valid from the passage. And social inequities. Globalized food markets frequently undermine competitiveness and viability of small scale local farming. This is also valid. B is the correct answer for question 12. All right, let's see the next one. Okay, so the question is about which of the following statements can be concluded. Can be concluded is another way to ask an inference. Just like we use two facts to conclude that it has rained, similarly can be concluded is another way to ask an inference. All right, let's look at 1. Democracies have institutional processes that regulate leadership emergence. This is spoken about in the first half of the passage, that there are processes in a democracy that will decide who is elected as leader. So regulate leadership emergence. By the way, this regulate leadership emergence was this word was a little hard for students to justify, I'm sure, but you'll notice that it's there in all options. So it's really like not something that we really need to solve or put too much effort in. 2 says dictatorships often arise during times of societal instability or institutional failure. This is valid. Often arise is a quantifying word or phrase which is also valid. All right. So 1 and 2 are valid here. Let's look at, so if 1 and 2 are valid, this option B gets eliminated. Okay. Now let's look at 3. Institutional checks in democracies make flawed leadership less permanent. So if you notice, 1 and 3 are the same thing stated in slightly different ways, right? There are checks, there are regulations for bad leadership. So 1, 2 and 3 are valid so far. We need to check 4. Elections always ensure morally upright leaders. So this is really easy for us to notice that always ensure is invalid. I expect most of you to get this question right, like close to all of us should get it right. C is the correct answer. 4 is invalid, C is the correct answer for question 13. Let's see the next one. Okay, now we are again back to assumptions, right? So assumptions are underlying the logic of the passage. We are at question 21. Constructive use of leisure has historically been a key driver of human progress. This is actually discussed in the passage outright, that how leisure is used is very important. So use of leisure, constructive or positive use of leisure, has been key driver for human progress. One is valid. One is valid. If I said it has not been, then it would invalidate the passage. So I know one is definitely a valid assumption. So that makes B, A and B invalid. Now I simply need to check 3 and 4, right? I don't need to check 2. 3 says passive entertainment activities are essential for emotional well-being. Passive entertainment, essential. Again, a quantifying word or phrase, invalid. This is not discussed in the passage. So 3 is invalid. That means we are left with 1, 2 and 4 only. C is the correct answer for question 21. 3 is invalid for using the phrase essential. Passive entertainment is essential is invalid. C is the correct answer. Let's look at the next question, 22. Which of the following statements align with the author's perspective? Now, statements aligning with the author's perspective is a way to ask the main point, we can say, right? Or it's a way to check which of the following would the author agree with, which is like a version, a combination of the main point and inference question. Okay, so we'll look at each option and we'll see what is being done. Let's look at one. Modern leaders can benefit from studying past military conflicts. Modern leaders can benefit from studying past military conflicts is a valid assumption. We are told this directly in the passage, that those of us who wish to lead can benefit. This is valid. 2 says circumstances change, but core leadership principles remain consistent. So things might change, but core leadership principles remain common. Remain consistent is actually a quantifying word or phrase, but it can be justified from the passage, which is why the author recommends that we study, because principles remain common, so we study history. So 1 and 2 are valid. This means actually option B is invalid. Option C is invalid. Now let's look at 3. Strategic failures in ancient wars share similarities with modern leadership failures. Strategic failures in ancient wars. So let's replace this with something that we'll say ancient military history similar with modern leadership challenges. Ancient military history has similarities with modern leadership challenges. You'll notice 1, 2 and 3 are all saying the same thing, right? So A is the correct choice. 4 is invalid for saying only historians and generals benefit from reading, right? So only historians and generals, invalid, again a quantifying word or phrase. Correct answer for question 22 would be option A. Okay, which pair of the following statements best captures the contrasting realities of digital interconnectedness? This is a slightly different way of asking the question. UPSC has done this once before, where you will get these two type of statements, and we need to check that digital interconnectedness in the passage has 2 contrasting aspects about it. We need to check whether those contrasting aspects are correctly given in the options, right? So let's first go with A. It enhances social activism and access to information. This is actually valid. it enhances social activism has been mentioned in the passage and it's actually valid. Let's look at B. It guarantees balanced and factual communication. Guarantees factual communication is invalid. Guarantees is a measuring word. Factual communication is a measuring word. So actually guarantees is the measuring word. So B is invalid. Factually invalid, right? It's not been stated in the passage. So these are invalidated. Now you simply need to check option C, right? All we need to do is check option C. C says it increases the risks of privacy invasion and mental health issues. Increases mental health issues, increases privacy invasion. These are valid. So the correct answer is option C. For question 23, correct answer is option C. Alright, this was, even though it has contrasting realities, this is a slightly different way of asking a question. We can say which of these are valid inferences about digital connectedness, interconnectedness, and it would still be the, these options would still be correct. So slightly different way of asking what we are already used to answering. I expect something like this probably maybe occurring once or twice in the paper, that they'll give us something like this, but it's a question type that we are used to. Okay. In terms of the principle of solving the questions. Okay. Let's see the next one. We are at question 31. Which can be most reasonably inferred? We are looking for inferences. I've already defined inferences for all of you. Okay. So, A says societal well-being is determined more by internal moral clarity than by external systems of support. So, societal well-being more based on internal moral clarity. This is actually valid from the passage. Let's look at what's wrong with options B, C and D. Each of them has quantifying words or phrases. Material prosperity naturally leads to a decline in ethical standards. Not discussed. Invalid. Government reforms are, so naturally leads to is a quantifying word or phrase. Government reforms are unnecessary if individuals cultivate inner values. Quantifying word or phrase invalid. External institutions are solely responsible for moral failures. So the right answer is option A. So far I would say all the questions that we have solved can be categorized as easy. Some of the later passages get a little longer, but the questions, the options are still easy. Let's look at question 32. Which of the following, if omitted, would least affect the author's core reasoning? Okay. Now I just want all of you all to focus on the question stem for a moment. We already know, and make a note of this. I expect something like this to be asked, because this is like, would the author agree or disagree? This is what we need to check. Would the author agree or disagree? And this we can determine based on the author's main point. Here it's called the core reasoning or core argument. So we already know, I've discussed it in now also and in class many times, what the main point is and how to identify the main point. You need to check whether the author would agree or disagree with the options. Here least affect, if omitted, would least affect the author's core reasoning. Like if we omit that, it will make no difference to the author. So we want to find the disagreeable option, right? This is what we are trying to select. Which of the following would the author disagree with? Pay careful attention here. Alright. So, Bhakti and Sufi traditions illustrate indigenous expressions of equality and dignity. This is valid. These traditions do express equality. This is what the author said. So this is, if I removed option A, it would affect the author's reasoning. So I'm not removing option A. Let's look at option B. The Enlightenment narrative implicitly sidelines non-Western moral systems. So Enlightenment narrative or ideals or discussions or writings sideline non-Western systems. This is valid. The author complains about this in the passage. If I remove this, the author's argument would fall apart. So we'll keep option B. Option B is correct. It's not what we are looking for. C says civilizations like Asia and Africa have historically lacked formal legal codification of justice. So have historically lacked. This is invalid according to the author. So C should be the right answer. We can remove C. It's not affecting the author's core argument. We'll check D once. Eurocentric framing restricts the legitimacy of alternative ethical paradigms. Option D is worded in a slightly complicated way, but European framing restricts legitimacy of alternative systems. This is the same as Bhakti and Sufi traditions illustrate equality and enlightenment sidelines that system. Correct? So option A, B and D are required for the author, to make his or her point. What is not required by the author is option C. Option C is unnecessary. I can remove option C. This is what, even if omitted, it would least affect the author's core reasoning. If this was too fast for you, please review what I've said. Understand first the question stem, then figure out how A, B and D are affecting the author's core reasoning. They're important to the author's core reasoning. C would not affect the author's core reasoning. C is the opposite of what is stated by the author. Right? Okay. Slightly complicated question. Let's look at the next one. So long passage, right? Longer passage, like I said. If you notice now, the length of the passage is a test of our reading ability, but the question is actually easy. Let's look at the question. Which of the following best differentiates direct and indirect agricultural risk management policies as implied by the passage? In the second half of the passage, the author is discussing direct and indirect agricultural risk management policies. All right. Okay. So let's look at one. Direct policies mitigate losses after a crisis, while indirect policies reduce exposure to risk beforehand. Okay. So mitigate losses after a crisis, valid, while indirect policies reduce exposure beforehand, valid, discussed in the passage. One is valid, that means B is eliminated. Let's look at 2. Direct policies include crop insurance, while indirect policies include investment in education. This is stated in the passage. So 1 and 2 are valid. So let's look at 3. Indirect policies cannot function without direct policies being in place, meaning indirect policies are necessary, direct policies are necessary for indirect policies to function. So this is cannot function is invalid, opposite of what is stated in the passage. 3 is invalid. So the right answer could be 4. We need to check 4. Direct policies are reactive, so post something. Indirect policies are proactive. Proactive because include investment in education and infrastructure. Direct policies are reactive. After there is loss of crop, we provide money in insurance. So C is the correct answer. Okay, based on, this is a factual question, based on the words in the passage, we need to evaluate whether 1, 2 and 4 are valid. They are. 3 with cannot function is invalid. Again, a quantifying word or phrase. Okay. Let's look at question 41. What is the main dilemma faced by policymakers in emerging economies as a result of unconventional monetary policies in developed nations? What is the main challenge? Now, actually, I just want to go back to the passage for this question for a moment. If you notice, one moment. So there is one challenge, which is for policymakers to strike a balance between supporting growth and maintaining financial stability, right? This is the challenge. The other thing is, in emerging economies, the spillover effects of such policies, quantitative easing policies in the Western countries, have created volatile capital flows. So this is the problem, and this is the possible solution. Problem is actually described from the first paragraph. I'm just simply revisiting that idea here. But my point of going back to the passage was to show you we are still about the main point of the author. The author told us a problem and gave us a possible solution of balancing it out. Okay. All right. Let's see the question stem. One, we are looking for the main challenge faced by policymakers because of the problem. As a result of the problem, like we just identified. What is the main? So we have to say solution. Solution was about balancing both. Right? So we are looking for a rewording of balancing both. Let's look at A. They must reduce inflation. So they must reduce inflation. Quantifying word or phrase invalid. This is not stated as the dilemma. They must adopt quantitative easing regardless of consequences. Must adopt invalid regardless of consequences. Also a quantifying word or phrase invalid. So A and B are invalid. Let's look at C. They are forced to balance domestic needs with global financial pressures. So balancing both, correct? D says they need to impose capital controls on all foreign investors. Need to impose quantifying word or phrase invalid on all foreign investors, invalid. Right answer is option C. So for question 41, right answer would be option C. They are forced to balance domestic needs with global financial pressures. All right. Another question from the passage, which of the following is not mentioned in the passage as a potential negative consequence of quantitative easing? All right. You'll notice that this is a factual question. It's actually, the options are really easy, but you'll notice that a question like this, if the passage is long, we have to actually go through the facts and check which of them is acceptable or not. Asset bubbles are a negative impact of quantitative easing. It's mentioned in the passage. Income inequality is also a negative impact of QE. It's mentioned in the passage. D says distortions in financial markets, also mentioned in the passage. What is the answer here is increased employment. This is not mentioned in the passage. Not mentioned in the passage, right? So C is the correct answer. Some of you would have missed these words or missed the word not specifically. Now sometimes UPSC used to give not in bold and capitals, and sometimes they don't. But it's our job to carefully look for the question stem first. In our stepwise solving pattern that I had spoken at the start of class, I consciously look at what the question is asking and then proceed to the options. C is the right answer here. Let's look at the next one. Question 43, passages of a respectable length here. Which of the following can be most accurately inferred? We are looking for inferences again, right? So let's start with D. Mechanization has replaced the need to consider geography for primary sector activities. So mechanization has replaced, quantifying word or phrase, right? Binary choice ho gaya. Geography is not needed anymore. Has replaced geography. This is invalid, not discussed in the passage. C says industrial distribution today depends equally on, again, a quantifying word or phrase not mentioned or discussed in the passage. Equally would be invalid. B says climate resilient practices have fully eliminated, again a quantifying word or phrase, dependence on natural environmental conditions. So B, C, D are all invalid. The right answer would be option A. While technological progress reshapes industries, natural factors continue to exert significant influence. So increasingly affected by modern interventions and also affected by physical factors, right? So A technological progress reshapes industries, so affected by modern interventions, natural factors continue to exert significant influence. One of the reasons why I think this question could be a little challenging would be the usage of the word significant. Okay. Principal, these are the words I was looking for, principal determinants. So notice that here is a quantifying word or phrase which could be problematic. But like I told you at the start of class, if I look for it in the passage and I find it, then it's justifiable. A is the correct answer. By the way, even if you're getting the questions right, please pay attention to the solving process. Those of you who are getting it wrong, especially pay attention to the solving process. The more methodical you are, the more your accuracy in the exam. All right, let's look at the next question, question 51. Which of the following assumptions can be reasonably made from the passage above? Okay, so again, it's reasonably made from the passage above doesn't really mean anything. We are focused on the word assumption. Okay, so one says pressure groups are always more effective. Again, always more effective, invalid, not an underlying assumption. If I say not always more effective, doesn't make any difference to the passage. So this negation test option 1 fails. So A and D are invalid. Let's look at, so we just need to check between 2 and 3. 2 says, 2 and 4, between 2 and 4, sorry. 2 says informal associations can influence policy even without formal political power. So let's check 2. Notice this line, how informal associations can transcend traditional political alignments and compel governments to reconsider policies. So 2 is actually valid. If I said informal associations cannot, that line that I just marked would get invalidated. So that means A, D and C are invalid. The right answer would be B, 2 and 3 only. Let's look at 3. The unequal resource distribution affects representational balance of pressure groups. This is valid if I said does not affect. The role that pressure groups play and the limitations that they have would change. So 2 and 3 are valid. B is the right answer for question 51. All right. I'm hoping the inference and assumption method of solving is clear to us. When we have an assumption, we check what is underlying that assumption. If we remove what is underlying that assumption, such as adding the word not here, that assumption would stop making sense. For inference, we need to check whether some associated fact is there in the passage and then whether we can make a valid inference or not. The exam is never going to ask you, is X an inference or an assumption? That doesn't happen, right? So we simply need to look at what is asked here and solve according to that. Let's look at question 52. Which of the following assumptions can be reasonably made? All right. Let's look at 1. Educational access without focus on quality creates long-term structural inefficiencies. Without focus on quality, this is a quantifying word or phrase, but this is justified. The author insists on quality in education. So 1 is valid. That means option C is incorrect. 2 says uniform centralized planning leads to poor adaptability and regional imbalance in educational policy. Now, according to the author, we are told that planning should not be centralized, it should be decentralized. So if it's uniform, it leads to poor outcomes. This is valid. If I said does not lead to poor outcomes, the idea that centralized planning is bad would be invalidated. So 1 and 2 are valid. Now I need to check 4 only, right? 1 and 2 are valid. I simply need to check 4. 4 says a culturally sensitive localized governance model. So localized, not centralized, localized model is crucial This is valid. If I said is not crucial, localized model is not crucial, it would invalidate the passage, which is why 1, 2 and 4 are valid assumptions. 3 is incorrect. Increased private sector involvement automatically ensures equity. So even if you may find question stems challenging, you may find assumptions and inferences challenging, make sure that you develop a really good ability of noticing, quantifying words and phrases. Even if you learn to compare these carefully with the passage, your accuracy is generally going to be much higher. Remember, to maintain accuracy, I'm not using any internal, my own descriptions. I'm relying on the words in the option or in the passage. Also, I'm not deciding how an option sounds. It sounds incorrect. This sounds incorrect. That's not a good way to solve questions. Because if you notice in the prior question, the example I gave you was the word significant sounded problematic, sounded incorrect. I'm sure many students chose some other option because of the word significant. But the passage has used primary deterrent in that case. So significant was acceptable. So don't decide based on sound. We make this mistake really often, the examiners know that. Alright. Correct answer for question 52 is option A. Let's look at question 53. Which of the following can be inferred from the passage above? We are told India's federal system grants complete autonomy to states, especially in fiscal matters. Now, when it says complete autonomy to states, is actually incorrect. And by the way, don't solve these based on memory. Don't solve the passages based on your own understanding or knowledge. Even though we know based on GS this is incorrect, I still expect you to check in the passage, right? What was said in the passage. Because passages always will not match what we've known or what we study. Don't use your own knowledge at all. This is invalid. If one is invalid, we simply need to check 2 or 4. 2 says judiciary acts as a balancing force between union and states. We know this is valid. This is discussed in the passage. So the right answer would be option B. I'll still explain 3 and 4. 3 says the center can assume significant powers during emergencies. This is a valid inference from the passage. 2 and 3 are valid. 4 says constitutional provisions consistently prevent cooperation. This is the opposite of what is stated in the passage. Again, don't use your own general knowledge, even though for this question it could have worked. UPSC will trick us about it for sure. So B is the right answer for question 53. Let's see the next one. Which of the following can be logically inferred from the passage? So we are asked to make some logical inference on the basis of the passage. 1 says the RTI Act has completely eliminated corruption in Indian governance. Really easy, invalidated the passage entirely. Completely eliminated corruption is invalid. So B and C are invalid. Let's look at 2. The effectiveness of RTI is significantly affected by administrative practices and political will. This is actually the complaint that was discussed in the passage, right? That political will changes the outcome of RTI. Administrative practices change the outcome of RTI. This is discussed in the passage. 2 is valid. Now we need to check 3 and 4. Actually, we can eliminate 4 first. That's a faster way to solve. So I'll just do that. 4 says amendments to RTI Act have been welcomed uniformly. Welcomed uniformly. Quantifying word or phrase. It's quantifying the degree of how happily RTI amendments were received. This is incorrect. So I'm using options to solve whenever possible. So B, C, D are incorrect. A is the right answer. For the sake of clarity, let me confirm statement 3. Citizens continue to rely on RTI despite legislative operational obstacles. This is valid. So A is the correct choice for question 61. Okay. Another long passage. By the way, even the passages have been long, in every question we found quantifying words or phrases in the options, and we could compare those phrases, and in most cases so far, I would say, except the least affect author's core argument, that except that question, most questions so far I would categorize as easy. If you include the length of the passage, then some of the questions can be categorized as moderate. But overall, the question itself and the options have been easy. All right. Which of the following best reflects the writer's opinion as presented in the passage? Writer's opinion is author's main point. Same thing. We can split this into blank A and blank B. Blank A is the topic. Blank B is what the author says about the topic, specifically about the topic, and we would get the main point of the author. All right. So let's look at 1. Delimitation is a mechanical process, should be conducted solely based on population figures. Should be conducted solely based on population figures. So 1 is invalid. 2 says states that have managed population control should be rewarded with more parliamentary influence. They should not be punished. The passage says the states who have population control should not be punished. That could be a valid opinion, but I can't say should be rewarded. This would be invalid, right? So 2 is invalid. So all we needed to do was solve 1 and 2, and we get the answer here, by the way, right? The answer would be option C. The current population-based delimitation approach may punish states. May is a quantifying word or phrase. If I said it will punish states, galat ho jata, right? It never punishes states, galat ho jata. But may punish states is valid, right? So 3 is valid, and 4, the constitution mandates delimitation, hence ethical or regional concerns are secondary. Ethics are secondary, invalid, right? So the right answer is option C for question 62, option C. Let's see the next one. Question 63, from a longish passage, but a long passage having 2 questions is definitely acceptable. Which of the following can be most reasonably inferred from the passage? A purely population-driven delimitation risks discouraging states from investing in governance. So this could actually be a valid inference. We'll put A aside. Purely population-driven risks discouraging states. B says future delimitation will guarantee equitable representation. Will guarantee equitable. These are all quantifying words. All 3 are quantifying words and phrases. B is invalid. C says higher population growth in a state necessarily indicates poor governance. This is invalid. D says demographic variations across states demand that delimitation be permanently suspended nationwide. Permanently suspended nationwide. Each word is quantifying something. Degree of how much, suspended also degree of what to do with this delimitation process, permanently also for how long. D is invalid. A is the correct answer for question 63. All right. So let's look at question. Let's look at question 71. Questions 71 and 72, I would argue these are question 71, 72, 73. So these are the longest. If you notice, this is a 1-page question, 1-page passage almost, and just 1 question asked from it. So if there was a passage that I expect you to skip, this would be the passage I expect you to skip. Question 73, at least for set C. This is still solvable according to me. The passage is long though. The passage is like almost a page and a half long, right? But you have 2 questions asked from it. Let's look at the questions. I'll actually Okay, let's look at the questions. Based on the questions, we'll evaluate the passage. Consider the following statements based on the passage above. Following statements based on the passage above. This is actually a factual question that is asked here, right? So let's look at one. Buddhism rejects karmic determinism in favor of volitional ethical conduct. Now, firstly, this passage was a little tricky to read also. But I think like I would still categorize it at moderate level, because the options are fairly easy. Like if you just look for the word karmic determinism, then we can confirm whether it rejects or not. And in favor of volitional ethics, we'll see if this is true from the passage. Rejecting rigid ritualism. Unlike interpretations of karma, early Buddhism highlighted volition. So if I look through the passage, now I don't know how much importance we can assign to look at information from the passage. It's a little challenging to read the passage. That's why I'm saying the question can be considered moderate. But one is valid here, right? One is valid. Let's look at 2. The influence of Buddhism was confined to Indian subcontinent. This is really easy. Was confined to Indian subcontinent. This is opposite of what is stated in the passage. So 2 is invalid. And we have the right answer. Hence, we can categorize even the question and the passage as moderate or easy even. The question definitely. 3 says modern reinterpretations of Buddhism attempt to reconcile its teachings with contemporary societal issues. This is discussed in the second half of the passage. So A is the correct answer. Let's look at question 72. What is the central theme? What is the main point of the author? All right. A says a historical account of the decline of Buddhism in India. Decline of Buddhism in India is discussed partially, but not the central theme. So this could be considered as somewhat factually true, but it's not the central theme. It's not talking about the main point of the author. Main point is how Buddhism was, how it changed, and how it was slightly different from the Vedic philosophy. So B says an exploration of Buddhist metaphysics and ritualism. Firstly, this is factually incorrect. If you notice, exploration of Buddhist ritualism. In fact, Buddhism was opposed to ritualism according to the passage. So this would be invalid. C says an analytical overview of Buddhism's evolution and modern relevance. An analytical overview of Buddhism's evolution and modern relevance. Analytical overview could be the right choice. It's not fully analytical, but it's just a moment. It's not fully analytical, it's not completely analytical, but there are parts of the passage which have analyzed Buddhism's evolution, and modern relevance is definitely discussed. So C could be closest to the central theme. And let's confirm that D says a critique of Buddhist philosophy in the face of modernity. So critique is invalid. The passage has done more than simply critique Buddhist philosophy. So the right answer for question 72 would be option C. All right, let's look at the last passage. I can see a student skipping this passage and question. I would agree also with most students, unless you are purely relying on passages or mostly relying on passages, then I expect you to solve this passage for sure. You don't have pretty much any choice. Let's look at the question here. Which of the following statements best captures the writer's point of view? Another main point question. One says Indian agriculture must transition from welfare-oriented approach to a globally competitive model. This has actually been discussed in the passage. that Indian agriculture must transition from welfare orientation. Global agriculture is also discussed, so 1 would be considered valid, B is incorrect. 2 says India should suspend all free trade agreements until small farmers are shielded. So, all free trade agreements is invalid. So, now we need to check either 3 or 4, one of the two. 3 says smallholder farmers can thrive only when they are treated as economic stakeholders, not passive beneficiaries. So, only and not need to be checked. Now, before we check only and not, what I can do is I can check 4 also. 4 says India should adopt a one-size-fits-all national agricultural model. A one-size-fits-all national agricultural model is actually invalid, right? So this means only and not can be justified from the passage. So let's say D is invalid. We'll look for how smallholder farmers can thrive in the passage. Notice this line. Equipping farmers with XYZ is essential for resilience in the face of shifting global trade winds and empowering farmers through policy. But this is really the line that justifies statement 3, which is not passive beneficiaries, make them participate, and only when they are treated as stakeholders, this is valid. So the right answer would be option A here for question 73. Question 74, oh, there are 2 questions from the passage. I can still see people not solve this passage. I'm just trying to recollect why I felt 74 is hard. 74 is long and it has a 6 statement question. By the way, the other thing that I want to mention is there is this trend that UPSC has been recently choosing is, and in one case they even asked a 7 statement question stem. So the number of statements is increasing consistently. So this adds to the difficulty. One of the key things about these question types is that we can actually use the options to a significant degree to jump to the right answer. Another that question type of practical implication. Remember, in this we just focus on the word practical. This is not that question type, but I'm talking about that question type because that also has 6-7 statements, and we try and answer practical implication based on if you are the state or if you are the central government, or if you are the, let's say, judiciary, what action would you take that will benefit the country? And we have to look at it practically. For this question type and this question type, using these options comes in very handy, right? So let's quickly go through this. 1 says agricultural subsidies alone can shield Indian farmers. Alone can shield Indian farmers. So 1 is invalid, right? 1 is invalid. If 1 is invalid, these 2 options are gone. And all we need to check is either option 4 or option 3. Let's look at 3. Uniform centralized agriculture reforms are key to India's success. Centralized and uniform agricultural reforms are key. This is invalid. This is actually, in fact, what this was, one size fits all. So this is the same as uniform, centralized. And this was invalid. Even in the prior question, this was invalid. So 3 is invalid. So we are left with just option A. Only option A, 2, 4 and 6. Let's look at 4. India's farmers need awareness. This is valid. of international standards to enhance resilience, enhance both resilience and exports. All right, this should be exports. 4 is valid. 5 says protectionist measures are presented as sustainable long-term solutions. So protectionism is sustainable and long-term, is opposite of what is stated in the passage, invalid. And 6 says state-specific agricultural visions are critical for integrating farmers into global value chains. So state-specific, region-specific, localized are critical, right? This is what was discussed in the passage. So based on the options we can eliminate B and D really quickly. And then if we eliminated 3, we can answer the question really quickly. Only for the sake of explanation, I went through 4, 5, 6. But if you had used the options carefully, you could have reached option A really, really fast. So it doesn't matter if so I was under the impression that this passage was hard because it had one question. I'd actually forgotten about the second question. If you have, the reason why I was thinking of it still as hard is because if you have more statements, make sure you use these options. Statements, multiple statements are coming in inference questions, assumption questions, but especially this practical implication question which we had asked in the prior Anubhav paper. Usually UPSC is asking only 1 or maybe 2 of these and not every year, but I do expect at least 1 this year. So make sure that you use this sort of solving process for it. All right. So with this, let me bring this discussion to an end. Just a brief overview for all of you. Make sure that your solving process is extremely methodical. Read first, identify the main point. Review question stem, what is being asked of you. When you have options, make sure you identify quantifying words or phrases in every option and check which is acceptable or not. If you follow this process in detail, your accuracy is going to be significantly higher than most students. What happens is when there is shortage of time, we end up messing up this process. So what I want you to practice in the days that are left, if you are solving anywhere less than 50 questions, please work on your speed, okay? And the way to work on speed is do short tests. Short, mixed. Use all questions, not just passages, not just reasoning, not just quant. Do a lot of short tests. Short tests would be somewhere like 10 questions. Try and do 10 questions in, let's say, 17 minutes, around 17 minutes. This would be an ideal, 15 minutes would be best case scenario, but 17 minutes is somewhat ideal. You aren't expected to solve all 80 questions. All right, we've covered the aspect of solving these questions and all question types that are asked by UPSC so far in the Anubhav test series and in our test series otherwise and in class. So make sure you follow that question stem and know what to do with it for every kind of question stem before the exam, and practice according to the method that I've spoken about. All right. So that's it from me. All the best to everyone. Thank you.